A suffocating stillness had claimed the palace halls, a weight so dense it seemed to press against every bone and nerve, threading itself through the very air in a rhythm both eerie and insistent, like a dark melody that refused to be ignored. This was no ordinary hush. It carried the uncanny timbre of anticipation, a foreboding note that left Catherine feeling exposed, unarmed, against a truth she had not been prepared to face. The silence was not just quiet, it was surgical, clinical, the kind that felt too heavy, too deliberate for what she had been led to believe were routine, everyday concerns. Every step she took in that hall echoed like a warning, bouncing off gilded walls, as though the palace itself were conspiring to reveal what had been carefully hidden. Louis had indeed been subjected to examinations, each one meticulously choreographed under the guise of developmental check-ins, standard monitoring, cautious reassurances, gentle protocols, all the outwardly comforting rituals designed to keep a parent at ease, to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Nothing, she had been assured repeatedly, could possibly justify alarm. And yet, the faces that confronted her told a story far grimmer. The tension was taut and sharp, lips compressed, eyes narrowing, pauses that seemed to stretch indefinitely. Every word chosen, every hesitation weighed like stone, delivered with precision meant to slice directly into the heart of any parent. These words bore a weight that refused to be ignored. They hit with the gravity of a verdict, irrevocable and final. Physicians did not hedge, they did not soften. Each syllable carried the sharp inevitability of something preordained, as if this moment of revelation had been quietly waiting to unfold all along, merely postponed, not stumbled upon by chance. In that instant, Catherine's meticulously maintained control crumbled beneath the sheer force of understanding. A profound, silent crisis had been taking root, growing unseen, unchecked, hidden behind the palace's polished veneer and sparkling reputation. Protocols and reassurances hung in the air like mechanical background music, precise yet utterly powerless against the raw truth. Catherine's composure fractured violently, uncontainably. Those present would later recall the scraping of a chair, the sharp intake of breath, trembling hands, the body's instinctive reaction to the unrelenting intrusion of reality. This was no confusion, it was the collision of remorse and shock. The kind of shock that shakes every certainty to its core and leaves no room for pretense or denial. Music. How could she have missed the signs? Who else had seen? And why had they stayed silent? Within moments, the palace's intricate, age-old machinery surged into motion. Lines went dead. Internal communications cut off. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Orders were shouted, sharp, urgent, unexplained. Aides glided through corridors like trained spectres, moving with precision to contain what was now an undeniable crisis. Music, once a subtle accompaniment meant to soothe and distract, now served a far more urgent purpose: control, containment, concealment. Catherine was momentarily held, a fragile figure under the palace's unyielding grip, until she was guided out of sight. Witnesses would later whisper that she vanished down a hidden corridor, eyes red, face pale, her body weighed down by the gravity of an irreversible revelation. Staff were instructed, speak nothing, speculate nothing, acknowledge nothing. The palace walls, long accustomed to maintaining secrecy, now pressed against the truth as heavily as they pressed against Catherine's shoulders. Music could not escape the walls, but secrets, as they so often do, found fissures, cracks, and corners through which they leaked. Alone, Catherine confronted a fear that can unravel any mother's world, a fear that had been stealthily growing in plain sight. To truly understand this moment, one must return to the subtle signs, those almost invisible indicators that the palace had deliberately overlooked. Louis, a bright spark of charm and mischief within the royal halls, had exhibited small quirks, peculiarities hidden behind sly smiles and polite manners. They were dismissed, explained away, or misinterpreted as fleeting whims. But in hindsight, each tiny deviation, Each pause or glance took on a more sinister tone. Music. What were the early warnings? Who had buried them beneath layers of etiquette, optics, and the relentless pursuit of a flawless image? Tiny delays in speech, brief lags in coordination, pauses during play that were waved off as imagination. Each small incident, trivial in isolation, formed a subtle but unmistakable pattern. Orchestrated smiles during photo sessions, public appearances that demanded unceasing joy, the expectation that Louis would always perform, always appear effortlessly radiant. The royal calendar moved forward relentlessly, but behind the structured facade, uncertainty simmered unseen, unacknowledged. Music. Palace staff, particularly those stationed at events, began noticing signs of fatigue in Louis. A wave here, a fleeting appearance there, and he would cling to Catherine's hand, his energy depleted. Clips circulated online. Admirers called it charming. Commentators chalked it up to the pressures of being a child in the spotlight, but whispers of concern began to circulate among insiders. Music. The nanny, vigilant and observant, became the first to voice what others feared, softly, cautiously, to a senior aide. Having observed countless children, she knew Louis was different. She had seen the subtle struggles, navigating directions, balancing unevenly, freezing in moments of sudden overstimulation. Her words were never meant to spark panic, merely caution, but within a palace obsessed with appearances, raising concern was perilous. Catherine, as a mother, felt it first. Mothers always sense when something is amiss. A deep, instinctive connection whispered, "Something is wrong." Every attempt to communicate these concerns was met with clipped smiles, polite deflections, and rehearsed reassurances. Boys develop differently, they said. He's in the spotlight. He just needs time. But Catherine wasn't worried about time. They were squandering it. Music. Family videos, once filled with joy and laughter, now replayed as cryptic warnings. Birthday clips in which Louis failed to respond to his name. Garden shots in which his gaze lingered far too long, blank and distant. She watched them repeatedly, searching for patterns, clinging desperately to the hope that it was all a misunderstanding. But clarity emerged, unstoppable and undeniable. Tests were quietly requested, but then stalled. Caught somewhere between command and execution, someone in the palace had deliberately pressed pause. The reasoning, of course, was predictable. Optics, privacy, the delicate dance of public perception, music. Yet the price of delay was catastrophic. Louis was slipping through the gaps of an organization far too focused on reputation to truly protect its own. And the music, the quiet, insistent rhythm of reality, finally breached the palace walls, piercing silence, demanding acknowledgement from a woman trained to follow rules, to move gracefully within the tight confines of royal expectation. Every carefully maintained illusion, every polished photo, every orchestrated public appearance now seemed secondary, insignificant in comparison to the urgent truth Catherine faced. Procedures, protocols, layers of discretion, they were powerless in the face of reality's raw, undeniable weight. The music, once a comforting background, became the unyielding soundtrack of revelation, reverberating through every corridor, echoing in every hidden hallway, threading through every chamber built on duty, protocol, and centuries of unspoken rules. Catherine, always composed, now faced the consequences of a system that had long prioritized image over immediate care, comfort, and clarity. And yet, as the quiet stretched and the palace braced for fallout, Catherine grasped an unflinching truth. A life, a childhood, an innocence had been quietly unraveling beneath walls sworn to protect it. Louis was slipping through cracks that no one had wanted to see, no one had wanted to acknowledge, and for the first time, the music was not there to soothe, but to reveal, to demand reckoning, to confront a mother who had spent a lifetime moving gracefully within the rigid, unrelenting confines of royal duty. Every polished surface, every whispered protocol, every carefully staged appearance, All of it could not soften the truth now pouring into her awareness like a tidal wave. Music had shifted from companion to messenger, carrying with it the weight of all that had been ignored, all that had been postponed, all that had been hidden. Even as aides moved with quiet urgency, phones dead, conversations frozen, and internal lines cut, Catherine felt the pulse of the palace's long-hidden machinery, its silent judgments, its concealed priorities, its relentless perfectionism. Music had become more than a metaphor. It was the rhythm of a system that had grown indifferent to the human heart at its center. She could feel it vibrating through the walls, through the polished floors, through the gilded railings, and through every unseen observer who had maintained the masquerade for years. Every whisper, every suppressed concern, every delayed decision had contributed to this crescendo. Catherine replayed the years in her mind, searching for the smallest sign she could have missed, the overlooked glance, the misinterpreted pause, the gesture dismissed as immaturity. And as she did, the palace's silence became a chorus of accountability, echoing the unrelenting rhythm of music that now demanded attention. It was not gentle, it was insistent. It would not be ignored. Every carefully orchestrated smile in public, every wave to cameras, every moment of appearing effortlessly joyous now seemed like a performance laid bare, exposing the fragility beneath. She saw the patterns clearly. Louis's fatigue, his reliance on her, the subtle tensions that played out in private moments and public appearances alike. What had once been overlooked, even celebrated as charm, now took on a terrifying clarity. Music. Every note, every pause, every beat became a signal she could no longer afford to ignore. And so, standing alone in the palace corridors, as the machinery of centuries continued its intricate dance of concealment and discretion, Catherine faced the ultimate, inescapable reality. A child, her child, had been quietly slipping away under the very roof meant to protect him. The walls of the palace, with all their history, all their grandeur, all their meticulous care for image, were powerless against the truth. Music was no longer a backdrop. It was a summons, an alarm, a reckoning that would not be silenced. Catherine understood at last that no protocol, no reassurance, no carefully choreographed appearance could substitute for the urgent, undeniable need to confront reality. And so, for the first time, the music demanded that she act, that she reckon, that she face the consequences of a system that had long prized perfection over care, presentation over protection. From the very moment Catherine began asking questions, the gears of palace politics shifted quietly, but with an inexorable force. Royal custom and a mother's intuition collided in ways that would shape every step of her fight. She reached out, seeking answers, clarity, even a path forward. But what she received instead was a procedure, a rigid, almost ritualized series of steps designed more to protect the institution than to help her child. Behind the glittering walls, where chandeliers cast light like cold surveillance, her quiet, urgent pleadings were met with stone-faced advisers. Their loyalty was not to her child, but to the crown itself, an unyielding institution that valued image above everything. Which secrets were they safeguarding? How far would they go to delay the truth? In the days that followed the initial diagnosis, Catherine began to understand a devastating reality. She was not merely confronting a medical concern, she was battling an institution. She didn't want fame. She didn't want headlines. She wanted honesty. She wanted expert opinions. She wanted insight into what was happening with her child. But every step forward seemed to be met with resistance, obstruction, and deflection. Even when Catherine requested access to experts outside the palace's carefully chosen circle, the answer was always the same. Not yet, not necessary, not advisable. Music. Each refusal, perfectly polished and polite, carried a silent, unyielding rhythm. Remain silent, stay in line, do not disrupt the machine. Advisors urged patience, reminding her that the results were preliminary, that nothing was confirmed. Moving outside the palace channels could spark panic, a media frenzy, public speculation, music. But to Catherine, this was not caution. This was control, confinement. The truth was not being sought. It was being managed. Every attempt to find clarity met bureaucratic coldness, procedural delays, or outright deflection. It was not negligence. It was deliberate, carefully calculated opposition. Tension mounted almost immediately between Catherine and her own private secretary, a woman who had long been regarded as a trusted confidant. Late one evening, according to insiders, Catherine confronted her, voice low but trembling, tinged with both anger and fear. "Why do you defend the institution instead of my son?" No answer could satisfy her. None existed, and William found himself in an impossible position. A father, a future king, a man deeply devoted to his wife, yet raised to serve something greater than himself. Catherine counted on him for support, yet sources indicate his responses were hesitant, conflicted, careful balancing acts between personal love and public duty. Music. He asked for patience, for faith in the process, but Catherine felt smothered, trapped within the very system that claimed to protect. Charles, fully informed, responded with a dismissive, almost clinical tone. He spoke about responsibility, story, legacy, but never once said Louis's name. To Catherine, that omission spoke volumes. Music. And in the quiet corners of power, Camilla moved. Publicly restrained, almost invisible, she didn't need to speak. Her influence was subtle but decisive, flowing behind the scenes like a river carving canyons in silence. Music. Many insiders believe it was Camilla's people who discouraged further testing, framing Catherine's concerns as emotional overreactions, suggesting, quietly, that she was becoming difficult to manage. Whispers became murmurs. Murmurs shaped decisions. Music. Catherine was not simply ignored. She was hushed, silenced, diminished by a system designed to preserve its own control above all else. Tradition and protocol chipped away at her authority, weakened her instinct, muted her voice. Each door she knocked on closed faster than before. Requests were politely deflected. She was no longer seeking answers. She was fighting for permission to ask questions at all. But secrets have a way of leaking out, eventually. Music. When the leak finally arrived, it didn't trickle. It detonated. Unintended, unplanned, yet unstoppable. One encrypted message from deep within the palace medical wing shattered the delicate illusion of control. The royal media erupted almost immediately. Anonymous, indisputable, terrifyingly precise. The leak undermined every carefully maintained narrative the palace had built. Music. Suddenly, what had been meticulously contained was beyond control. Silence, once a tool of management, became suspicion. Carefully curated narratives fractured under the weight of the truth. For the first time, the palace machine, the institution built to dictate perception, could not control what the world would see or believe. For Catherine, this was no longer about appearances, protocol, or legacy. It became raw, urgent, unfiltered. A mother standing alone against a machine built to silence her, to dismiss her fears, to delay the truth she had known instinctively. The consequences of postponing honesty were immediate. When the world prioritizes image over fact, the cost is always paid by the most vulnerable. Louis, his safety, his childhood, each day without transparency was a day of risk, a day the palace insisted she could not acknowledge. Music. Questions began surfacing, conversations leaked quietly to the press, and speculation turned into public scrutiny. The palace, accustomed to controlling every narrative, suddenly lost its grip. Carefully orchestrated appearances, controlled imagery, every rehearsed smile, the fragile veneer cracked. Catherine's fight became emblematic, a story of secrecy, authority, and maternal instinct clashing against centuries of power and tradition. Music. Every whisper mattered. Every quiet conversation behind closed doors carried consequences. Every delay, every stone wall, every deflection shaped outcomes far beyond what the palace could control. Observers and insiders understood that the narrative was shifting. The palace's confidence, once unwavering, began to crumble. For those following, it became clear this was more than palace intrigue. This was a living, unfolding story of secrecy, power, and a mother's fight for her child. A narrative the palace had tried to contain but could not. Music. So, to stay informed, to understand the full scope of what is happening behind the walls, to witness how events unfold and uncover the truths the palace hoped to keep hidden, comment with your thoughts, share your observations, and subscribe for ongoing updates. Every revelation brings clarity. Every leak, every insider account, every shift in power adds to the story that refuses to be silenced. Music. This is more than a royal drama. It is a lesson in control, secrecy, and maternal instinct. It is the story of one woman's fight to protect her child in the face of an institution that demanded silence, that valued legacy over truth, that relied on tradition to suppress urgency. The narrative is alive, and each day adds a new layer. The story is far from over, and as the palace struggles to regain control, every revelation draws us closer to truths that were never meant to see the light of day. Stay with the story. Keep watching. Keep listening. Comment, share, and subscribe. This is just the beginning of a saga that will continue to challenge everything we thought we knew about power, secrecy, and the cost of silence. The palace can no longer dictate the narrative. The world is watching, and Catherine's fight, her voice, her instincts, they will not be ignored. Music.